The fire had long since gone out, but the land still remembered. Charcoal black beams jutted from the earth like bones. Smoke hung in the air, ghost thin but lingering, carrying with it the smell of loss and scorched hope. The prairie wind whispered through what remained of the homestead, pushing aside the silence with an uneasy hand. And somewhere beneath the rubble, a girl breathed, not a sound, not a cry, just breath, shallow, hidden, covered by ash and a mother's final act of love. Miles east, Calder Boone rode in slow from the fence line. He wasn't a lawman, nor a rancher in the usual sense. Folks in the county called him the Quiet Boone, a man who lived off his own land and kept to himself. His boots were worn, his hat older than most of the horses he trained, and his heart, well, that had been buried with his wife 5 winters ago. That morning, he had been checking the water troughs near the north pasture when he saw the plume. Smoke. Thin but wrong. Not chimney smoke, not cook-fire smoke. Fire meant trouble. Out here it always did. Calder rode fast. By the time he reached the homestead, the fire had done its work. The land was quiet, scorched, and empty, except for the crows circling overhead and the silence that pressed in like mourning cloth. He dismounted, pulling his hat low against the wind. The house was unrecognizable, just black timbers and collapsed stone. His eyes scanned the wreckage for movement, for signs of life or death. Then he saw it, a shape in the ash, small, curled, still. He moved carefully, crouched low, and began to clear away debris with his gloved hands. At first he thought it was a bundle of cloth. Then he heard it. A cough. He froze. The ash shifted. Then 2 eyes opened wide from beneath the soot. Big, dark eyes filled with something beyond fear, shock, silence, survival. She couldn't have been more than 6, and she wasn't crying. Just watching him. Calder set his tools aside, took off one glove, reached out slow like he would to a spooked colt. "You're safe now, little one," he said, his voice low, warm. "Ain't nobody here gonna hurt you." She didn't speak, but she reached up. Her fingers were burned, raw, her face streaked with soot and tears. He lifted her carefully, like something sacred, held her close to his chest and felt her tremble, finally letting go of whatever strength she had left. She clung to his coat like a lifeline. And in that moment, Calder Boone, widower, farmer, a man who had forgotten how to need or be needed, felt something shift inside him. Like roots breaking through dry earth, Calder laid the girl gently across the back of his horse, wrapping her in the wool blanket he kept tied behind the saddle. She didn't protest, didn't cry, just leaned into him like she'd run out of fear hours ago. The ride back to Boone's ranch was slow and careful. He kept a hand on her back, steadying her as the trail dipped and climbed. The girl didn't say a word. Not when they passed the split oak tree. Not when his ranch house came into view. Not even when the wind picked up and whispered her name, though he didn't yet know what it was. The ranch house was modest but solid, timbered by Calder himself, built for a family that never quite came to be. He carried the girl inside, laid her down on the bed nearest the stove, and stoked the fire until it gave off enough warmth to chase the chill from her bones. She didn't resist the hot water he dabbed across her arms and face. Her skin, beneath the soot, was pale as dawn. He brought soup. She didn't touch it. He offered water. She sipped, slowly. And when he crouched beside her, resting his forearms on his knees, he asked the first question he really needed to know. "Do you have a name?" Silence. The girl looked away, pulling the blanket tighter. Calder nodded. "That's all right. You don't have to talk yet. You're safe here. You hear me?" No answer. Just those eyes again, wide, watching. Too old for a child that young. He stood, filled a kettle, and set it on the stove. The room smelled of ash and pinewood smoke. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie like it was mourning with her. That night, Calder sat by the fireplace, boots off, the girl asleep in the bed behind him. He could hear her breathing, shallow even. He hadn't sent for the sheriff, not yet. Something told him this girl had been hidden for a reason. Something deeper than fire, something darker than an accident. He looked over his shoulder. She was curled into herself, thumb tucked under her chin, blanket pulled to her ears. Still no name, still no sound, just the steady rise and fall of survival. Calder wrote a single line in the worn leather-bound notebook he kept on the shelf. "Tonight I found something I didn't know I was missing." He closed the book, sat still. And for the first time in a long, long while, he prayed. Not for forgiveness, not even for strength, but for a little girl who hadn't said a word, yet had already spoken to something deep in his bones. Morning broke slowly, as it always did on the prairie. The kind of dawn that didn't rise in a blaze, but crept soft through the cracks, lighting up dust motes and floorboards without asking for attention. Calder was already up, feeding the stock before the sun cleared the ridge. He kept glancing back toward the house, unsure if the girl would still be there, like maybe she'd vanish as quietly as she'd arrived. But she hadn't moved. When he walked back in, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, watching the kettle boil. Still silent, Still waiting. He set a tin cup in front of her, filled with warm milk and a drizzle of honey. Try that, he said gently. Help your belly wake up. She stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, brought it to her lips. No thank you, no words, but she drank. Progress. Calder leaned against the counter, arms folded, trying to measure how to handle this. He'd known horses that wouldn't be touched for weeks after being broken. Maybe grief worked the same in little girls. I've been thinking, he said softly. Can't keep calling you hey there and little one. You got a name, I figure. And if you don't feel like telling me yet, maybe you can point. He reached into the drawer beside the stove, pulled out an old letterboard his wife had once used to teach neighbor children their letters. Dusty, half-warped from heat, but it still worked. He laid it on the table and set down the alphabet pieces one by one. Then he stepped back. Take your time. If you want to tell me, it's just you and me here. The girl stared at the letters. Her eyes moved slowly, unsure. She didn't touch anything. Minutes passed, then her small hand crept out. She nudged one letter, then another. E-L-L-A. Ella. Calder felt his breath catch, not from surprise, but from the sudden gentle truth of it. Ella, he said aloud, as if trying it out on the air. Well now, that's a good name. She looked at him, eyes cautious. He smiled. Nice to meet you, Miss Ella. For the first time since he'd pulled her from the ashes, something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not yet, but the beginning of trust. That afternoon, Calder cleaned out the small spare room. It had been empty since Ruth passed, but the window still opened and the quilt still held its color. He didn't say it out loud, but something in him wanted Ella to stay, not just until they found answers, but longer, long enough to build something back. At dinner, she ate a full slice of cornbread, still silent, still watching. But when she finished, she slid the tin plate forward, not with hesitation. With purpose. A thank you unspoken. Calder met her gaze across the table. And in that quiet, flickering moment, a man who'd long since stopped hoping for anything new realized something had come back to life. Over the next 3 days, the ranch settled into a rhythm that neither Calder nor Ella had expected, but both quietly welcomed. Calder woke early, always. He checked the fencing, tended to the animals, and stacked kindling by the door. Ella, small as she was, had a habit of following him, barefoot, blanket still wrapped around her like a shawl, eyes alert under her tangle of soot-dark hair. She didn't speak, but she didn't hide anymore. When Calder chopped wood, she handed him logs. When he fed the chickens, she scattered feed behind him like she'd done it before. And when he sat on the porch with a tin of coffee, she sat beside him, her hands wrapped around warm milk, watching the horizon as if it owed her an answer. On the 4th morning, Calder rode into town. He needed supplies, bandages, sugar, flour, and answers. He stopped first at the general store, where Mrs. Delaney noticed the ash stains still on his sleeves. Boone, you look like you've been digging in ghosts. He nodded. There was a fire. South Ridge. Homestead gone. She went still. The Whitleys live down there. Calder's mouth tightened. They don't anymore. Mrs. Delaney crossed herself. You find the girl? He paused. Yeah. Alive? He nodded again. Her eyes welled up. That poor child. You knew her? Everyone knew Ella Whitley. Her mama was the one always bringing pies to the church socials, even when she had nothing left. Kind woman, sweet girl, no father. He died in Missouri before Ella was born. Calder absorbed that in silence. Mrs. Delaney looked at him carefully. And she's with you now? He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, she is. Well, she said firmly, you tell that girl she has family all over this town, and none of us will let what happened go quiet. But Calder shook his head. I think she needs peace more than people right now. Mrs. Delaney handed over the flour. Peace don't last long in towns like this, not when someone sets a house ablaze on purpose. He froze. What did you say? She leaned closer. That wasn't lightning. Sheriff says the Whitley place was torched, with intent. Someone wanted them gone. That night, Calder sat by the fire, staring into the flames with a frown carved deep across his brow. Ella was already asleep, curled in the spare bed. He thought about the way her mother must have hidden her, how she covered her child with ash and soot to shield her, knowing she wouldn't survive herself. He looked over his shoulder at the door, at the rifle near the stove, at the stars above the chimney. Someone had wanted the girl dead. And Calder Boone, quiet man, lonely widower, no longer just a farmer, had just made himself her shield. The next morning, Calder didn't saddle his horse. He walked the perimeter of the ranch instead, checking every fence line, every tree line, every distant shadow. His boots crunched slow across dry grass, and his hand never strayed far from the old Winchester strapped across his back. He'd spent years letting the world forget him. Now he couldn't afford to forget it back. When he returned, Ella was waiting by the barn door. She wore an oversized coat that trailed nearly to her boots, Ruth's old ranch coat, and held a wooden spoon like a scepter. She didn't speak, but she pointed to the stove where the kettle was whistling with a sharp urgency. Calder grinned. Bossy little thing, aren't you? She just blinked. He poured her milk and stirred the oats. She ate quietly, sitting across from him, and for the first time since he'd brought her home, he saw color return to her cheeks. That made him feel something he didn't have a name for. By mid-afternoon, a rider came up the trail. Slow, tall in the saddle, dust clinging to his coat like warning. Calder stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, not aimed, but not hidden either. The rider lifted a hand in peace. "Boone," he called, reining in near the corral. "Didn't come to trouble you." It was Sheriff Earl Paxton, a man with too much weight in his eyes and not enough help in his office. "Heard you found the Whitley girl." Calder didn't answer right away. The sheriff dismounted. "I'm not here to take her. I just need to ask. Did she say anything?" Calder shook his head. "Not a word, not yet. We found her mama's body by the back door. She bled out trying to shield that girl." Earl's voice cracked. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. A sketch. A man's face, rough lines drawn fast. "Neighbor said this man was seen near their place a day before the fire. Stranger. Rode a paint horse. Mean eyes. You see him, Boone, you let me know." Calder took the sketch and studied it. He didn't know the face, but he'd remember it now. "If he comes here," Calder said evenly, "I won't need to let you know." The sheriff gave him a look, then nodded once. "I know you'll do what's right, same as always." That night, Calder sat in his rocker while Ella played with a length of string near the hearth, her face glowing from the fire. She'd started humming. No words, just a soft, broken tune, like the kind mothers sing when rocking babies in the dark. He watched her for a long time. Then he whispered to the room, to the night, to Ruth, if she was listening. "I don't know if I'm the man this girl needs, but I swear I'll never let her be hurt again." And outside, past the porch and the tall grass, the wind carried the promise into the hills. The next morning brought something new, not from the land, but from Ella. She stood beside Calder as he finished mending a chicken coop wall, holding the same old spoon she carried like a sword. Then for the first time she tugged at his sleeve and pointed to the barn. Calder followed. Inside, she walked straight to the far stall, the one filled with unused tools and hay from last season. She knelt, fingers blackened again with soot and dust, and began brushing the floor with her palm. At first, Calder wasn't sure what she was doing. Then he heard the hollow thud. A loose board. He crouched beside her. Carefully he pulled it up. Underneath lay a bundle of waxed cloth, tied with red twine. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a folded paper, creases soft with time, and a silver locket smeared with ash. Ella stepped back. He opened the paper. It was a letter. The handwriting was rushed but legible. A mother's hand. Ella's mother. "If someone finds her, please protect her. I don't know who to trust anymore. He said he'd come back for us, but it wasn't love. It was control. She saw too much. He won't let her go, not if he finds out she's still alive. Tell her I never stopped loving her. Tell her I tried." Calder's hands shook slightly as he folded the letter again. "You hid it here?" he asked gently. Ella nodded once, then looked up at him for the first time, with something between warning and memory. That name, he, was someone real, someone Ella knew, someone who might still be looking. Calder took the locket, wiped it clean, and handed it to her. She opened it herself. Inside, a picture. A young woman with kind eyes, holding a toddler. And on the opposite side, etched in tiny script, "To Ella, forever." Ella closed it with care, then clutched it to her chest. Calder rose, eyes hardening. He'd hoped maybe the past would stay where it belonged, in ash and memory. But this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning. Someone had tried to erase this girl, and her mother had died making sure that didn't happen. That night, Calder nailed shut every loose window. He moved Ella's bed into the main room, near the stove, and within arm's reach. He loaded his rifle and placed it near the front door. Not because he was afraid, because he was ready. And because now it wasn't just about sheltering a lost child. It was about protecting her future. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the way peace feels. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Calder felt it in the way the crows gathered near the fence line at dusk, in the way Ella paused whenever she heard hooves in the distance, in the way the wind seemed to press harder against the windows at night. One evening, while boiling beans on the stove, Calder looked up and found Ella standing at the window. Still, silent, eyes narrowed. He wiped his hands and stepped beside her. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't speak, just raised a finger and pointed. Out beyond the north pasture, where the land dipped low before rising into scrub-covered hills, a figure sat on horseback. Too far to make out his face, still as a shadow, watching. When Calder stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, the rider turned and rode off. Fast. Calder's jaw clenched. He stayed outside long after the dust settled, scanning the tree line until night swallowed everything. Ella sat on the porch steps beside him, locket in hand. She still didn't speak, but she didn't need to. She knew that rider. Or worse, she knew he knew her. The next morning, Calder rode into town, left Ella with Sadie Carter, a neighbor woman whose tongue was sharp, but heart was kind. He didn't like leaving her, but there were things he needed to know. At the sheriff's office, Earl Paxton met him with tired eyes. We had trouble out by the freight road last night, the sheriff said. Cattle scattered, fence cut clean. You think it's connected? The sheriff handed him a sketch, same one as before. Two more folks say this man's been spotted near the valley, real snake-eyed type, asking about a girl, not just any girl, asking about Ella Whitley. Calder's hand curled around the paper. Then you know he's still looking. Sheriff Earl nodded. And he ain't asking with good intentions. Then I hope he finds me first, Calder said coldly, because she's not his to find. Back at the ranch, Sadie handed Ella back with a grin and a small loaf of bread. Calder ruffled the girl's hair. She leaned into it, just enough to let him know she'd missed him. That night, as he tucked her in on the cot beside the fire, she finally whispered something. So quiet, he almost thought it was the wind. His name's Raylan. Calder froze. Ella looked up at him, wide-eyed, brave but trembling. Mama said he wasn't my daddy, but he wanted me to be his. She said he hurt people who said no. Calder crouched beside her, heart like thunder in his chest. You're safe now, Ella, you hear me? That man doesn't get to write the rest of your story. She nodded slowly. Then, for the first time, she reached for his hand. Held it. Didn't let go. And as the fire crackled beside them, Calder Boone knew that the war for this girl's safety had only just begun. But so had something else. A bond deeper than blood, steadier than fear, and stronger than fire. Calder didn't sleep that night. He sat in the old rocking chair by the fire, rifle within reach, boots still on. The house creaked in that way old houses do, not because of ghosts, but because they remember things. He watched Ella as she slept, one arm tucked beneath her head, the silver locket rising and falling softly on her chest. Raylan. That name sat in Calder's mind like a burr in a boot. He didn't know the man. But he knew the type. The kind who wanted control more than love. The kind who came back not because they missed you, but because you'd slipped from their grip. And Ella? She had slipped, thanks to her mother. Thanks to a moment of ash and bravery. And now, thanks to him. By morning, Calder had a plan. He went into town again, this time not just for talk. He rode straight to the print shop and handed a scribbled note to the owner. Can you run this in tomorrow's paper? The man read it, raised an eyebrow. You sure? Every word. The next day, the ad would appear in small print, buried among cattle auctions and church notices. To the man asking questions about Ella Whitley. She's not hiding. I am. If you've got something to settle, come to Boone Ranch, but come like a man, not a coward. CB. It wasn't a trap, it wasn't bait. It was a line in the sand. 2 days passed. On the second night, while feeding the horses, Calder heard something behind him, light, fast, like a small storm on 2 legs. Ella ran into the barn, clutching something in her hands. She held it out, a small scrap of fabric, burnt at the edges. He took it. At first he didn't recognize it, but then he saw the corner, the same pattern from her mother's dress, the one in the photo inside her locket. Calder knelt. Where did you find this? Ella pointed. Behind the fence, on the west side. That meant one thing. Raylan had been there. Calder stood slowly, jaw tight. He looked out across the land as dusk settled in. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was waiting. That night, Calder brought Ella's cot closer to the fireplace again. But this time, he slept on the floor right beside her, rifle laid across his lap. Before she drifted off, Ella whispered again, If he comes, don't let him take me. Calder looked at her, and his voice was firmer than it had ever been. He won't, ever. And this time she believed him. Not because he promised, but because she'd already seen what kind of man he was. The next morning was so still, even the birds didn't sing. Calder stood by the corral, mug of coffee in one hand, his eyes fixed on the northern ridge. He didn't know how, but he felt it, like the land itself held its breath. Ella stayed inside, as she had for the past 2 days, drawing shapes in Ruth's old sewing book, flipping through pages she couldn't read but seemed to understand. It calmed her. Calder didn't interrupt. Midday, the silence broke. Hoofbeats. Not fast, not rushed. Measured. Calder turned slowly, stepped down off the porch. A single rider crested the hill. Raylan. Even from a distance, Calder knew it had to be him. The horse was slick black, tall. The man rode like someone who thought he owned whatever he touched. Long coat, hat pulled low, posture too perfect for these parts. He didn't stop at the fence. He rode all the way to the house. Calder didn't move. His rifle rested, but close. He waited. Raylan dismounted like a man stepping into his own story. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Mr. Boone, is it? Calder said nothing. Raylan glanced toward the house. You've got something that belongs to me. Still nothing. Raylan's lips twitched. Or someone. Calder's voice came slow, deliberate. That girl doesn't belong to anyone. Raylan walked a step closer. Her mother would say otherwise. Calder's jaw tightened. Her mother died protecting her. That says everything. Raylan's hand slid into his coat. Calder's voice dropped lower. Don't! Raylan froze, but didn't pull his hand out. You think you're some kind of savior? Some frontier saint? You don't know what that child's seen? What she's capable of? I know what kind of man comes after a child with a fistful of threats and ash on his boots, Calder replied. Raylan took a slow breath. I made a mistake once. Trusted her mother. She ran. But the girl, she's mine to raise. No, she's hers to become. The two men stood in silence. Then, from the house, Ella's voice. You're not my father. Raylan turned sharply. She stood in the doorway, Ruth's old coat draped across her shoulders, the silver locket shining against her chest. Her voice didn't shake. She looked at Raylan like she'd looked at the fire that took her home, directly. Raylan's hand twitched again, but Calder was already moving. The rifle was in his hands before Raylan could blink. Last chance, Calder said. Raylan hesitated, measured, then lowered his gaze, smiled. You'll regret this. He climbed back on his horse, rode off without another word. Calder watched him disappear over the ridge. Ella came to stand beside him, small and steady. He looked down at her. You all right? She nodded. Then after a pause, she whispered, You didn't just protect me, you believed me. Calder knelt beside her, eyes meeting hers. That's what family does. She blinked. Family? He smiled softly. If you want it to be. And for the first time, she smiled back. Spring came early that year. The snowmelt carved new lines in the land, and wildflowers bloomed stubbornly along the fence lines. Calder patched the roof with fresh timber. Ella planted wild mint near the porch. And the ranch, once quiet, once hollow, was slowly, unmistakably coming back to life. Raylan never returned. No lawman had seen him since. Maybe he went east. Maybe he never really came for Ella. Maybe he just came to remind her what fear felt like. But he failed, because she had looked him in the eyes and she didn't break. She had Calder now, and a home built not on blood but on trust. One morning, Calder carved a plank of cedar he'd been saving since Ruth passed. He sanded it smooth, painted it with his own hands. When he was finished, he called Ella out to the porch. She stood barefoot in the grass, arms folded in Ruth's old coat, watching him with a furrowed brow. He leaned the sign against the front post. It read, Boone and Ella, Ranch of Second Chances. Ella blinked, looked up at him. You really mean that? Calder knelt down beside her. Only if you do. She didn't answer right away. She looked out at the land, the house, the barn she helped clean, the field where she planted wildflowers. Then back at the name. Her name. Then she nodded. Once. And Calder. A man who'd lost a wife, a future, a reason to speak too loudly, pulled her into his arms and held her like nothing in the world could break through. Not fire, not men like Raylan, not silence. Because out of the ashes she had found more than shelter. She had found belonging. And Calder Boone, a man who once thought the world had nothing left for him, had found a daughter. Not by blood, but by something stronger. Choice. That night, the fire crackled as it always did. Ella slept with her locket beside her, now cleaned and polished, her name carved beneath her mother's on the back in tiny, perfect letters. Calder sat with his journal and wrote one final entry beneath the worn leather cover. She was hidden in the ashes, and the world thought she was gone, but I found her. Or maybe she found me, and now we're both no longer lost. He closed the book, tucked it away, and as the wind danced across the hills, carrying nothing but the scent of pine and the echo of second chances, the Boone and Ella Ranch stood warm and full of life beneath a sky that had never seemed so wide.